Speaking of national and international bodies getting involved, there's also actually down at Stonehenge an interesting issue at the moment in terms of parking. And the reason why this is intriguing and why it's sort of also connected, because again we're talking about access and congestion and so on and so forth. The parking charges at Stonehenge apparently are too much for the Druids. They don't like it, and they've won the right to. I want to be accurate here. They've won the right to take English heritage to court in order to essentially. I think they're aiming for free and open access to park at Stonehenge, largely on religious grounds. And what's fascinating here is, for me, this is fascinating for two reasons. First of all, I have a personal problem with Stonehenge and Druids. Not in so much as no, in so much, no, let me just say, in so much as I accept that they are arguably the latest. Appropriation of the monument. You know, this monument was looked after by over thousands of years by various people, and if it wasn't, it wouldn't be there today. But it's more a case of the in this instance, I think they've gone just a step too far, because, well, for example, you have to pay to get into, as you were saying earlier, Canterbury, or you have to pay to get into York Minster if you're a Christian, for example. And in that sense, access to monuments has to be mediated by also care for the monument.
Actually, can I just jump in there, Mark?
Yeah.
You have to pay to get into those places if you're a Christian and a tourist.
Yeah.
However, I'm pretty sure, certainly in the case of Canterbury, if you're going in to attend a service, like for instance the Christmas Eve Carol service, that many people will have enjoyed their equivalent, their version of recently, you don't have to pay.
Well, no, and in that in that sense, yes, potentially I've slightly missed that point, but actually, in that the point I was just about to make was that this money goes towards the upkeep of the monument, and actually the equivalent, say for example, would be a solstice occurring at the monument and people turning up, and the community, the people who turn up, including and who are attached to this community, are infamous for leaving the monument in a terrible state when they leave. So in some ways, in the same way that when you're not attending a service, you sort of help to keep, for example, York Minster standing. In the case of the mass Druid access in, say, the Summer Solstice, perhaps there is a good argument to be made that actually this fee helps people clean up afterwards. It's a curious one, but the reason why it's curious anyway, even if you could go so far as to say, well, actually, they deserve to have access based on their claim on the monuments. This is a fascinating one because actually King Arthur Pendragon of the Druids has now effectively put English heritage and the legal system into a situation where English heritage may actually have to come out with big archaeological guns and say, actually, you've got no claim. You've got no legitimate claim on this monument, and he may well be the Druidic leader who's overseeing the delegitimization of the link between Druids and Stonehenge through a legal argument. I find it fascinating that actually, because they don't want to pay for parking, they may well end up actually in a situation where English heritage is having to absolutely break the link between Druids and Stonehenge. I don't know, what do you think about this? I mean, because actually I posted this on the Archaeosuite Facebook page, and the response was very strong. Some people were sort of saying, for example, on the for example, pagan side of the community, they were sort of saying, well, actually, yes, I think maybe we should look after the monument better. And then on the archaeological side, they were saying, finally, we can have this discussion out open and based on evidence. I mean, what do you reckon?
I think it's a fascinating cultural issue. I could play devil's advocate and say, when you dig up the remains of a Neolithic solstice feast, if that's what we dig up at these sorts of monuments, places like Chisholmbury Midden and so on, where you've got an Iron Age cultural site, pre-Roman Iron Age cultural site, which is basically a build-up of rubbish, like a Middle Eastern tell. Mm-hmm. Or a massive, as I say, massive hilltop midden. What's the difference between that and a solstice festival, in the 1970s, which are now the evidence for those are being investigated. The Isle of Wight festival's been looked at archaeologically from 1970, Jimi Hendrix's last gig.
Yep.
So in fact, what we're looking at is a cultural continuum that goes right back to when those monuments first emerged in the landscape.
We are, and I have acknowledged that. It was the first thing I said. But I think what always bothers me about Stonehenge is the fact that people want to talk about and focus on Stonehenge because Stonehenge is famous. You never really hear this sort of discussion happening about, say, Castle Rigg, which in my opinion is a far superior individual monument.
Or Arbor Low. I mean, everyone's got their favourite, haven't they?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, Stonehenge is fascinating, I think, as part of a landscape, but no one ever talks about it like that. They always talk about it as a monument. The same, the Druidic community tends to talk about it as a monument. The way it's reported in the news is as a monument, and perhaps this is kind of the core of the matter: is that Stonehenge comes with so much baggage that maybe actually, personally, I'd love to see a moratorium on new theories on Stonehenge for 5 years, and let the media and the news talk about actually other monuments in Britain, acknowledge that, and then come back to Stonehenge, because I can't help but wonder whether or not the reason why it is such a battleground is because it is famous, and it is famous because it's a battleground, and it just sort of, the cycle continues onwards, if that's what I mean, from a cultural perspective.
I think that's certainly true to an extent, but in a sense, we are where we are. It's been a nationalist icon since the days of Geoffrey of Monmouth. Yeah. Not to mention the Druids and a certain Mr. Stukely. So the baggage is already there, and a moratorium in 5-10 isn't going to make that much difference because people are still going to be invested in it.
Yeah, and you're get little cartoons with Druids building Stonehenge. I've
done it myself. We led an article on Stonehenge on the pipeline with a gag about these two skin-clad characters standing in front of the Trilithians, and one saying, we can start the tunnel outside Hugg's hut and emerge by the Druid shrubbery.
You're part of the problem, Andy. You're
hands up, guilty. But that's where the recognition comes from, and that actually, in a sense, I think as archaeologists we should celebrate that because people are invested in it.
They are, and I suppose I should have prefixed everything I've just said with this statement, and that is that obviously it is sort of partly tongue in cheek, but I suppose my particular fascination with this conversation, in terms of ownership, access, the road network now, and also, for example, the Druids, is I'm fascinated because it sort of reflects, in part, for example, a national obsession, but I think also it's kind of, to a certain extent, what's wrong in many respects with so much of the stuff that we're going to be talking about in this podcast as the months go on, and that is that people tend to be quite lazy when they report and think about the past. And in this instance, if someone wants to write a quick piece about history in Britain, they go, "What's happening at Stonehenge lately?" And often they report it as though actually nothing much is happening, but the Druids want to get access for parking. And yet there's so much good work being done surrounding these monuments.
Absolutely. And the point I think, if I can jump in there, Mark, the point I'd make about this is, in a sense, the Druids are a bit of a smokescreen. Yeah. Because the real issue in the tunnel is not about whether the Druids can park for free or not, and whether they're even valid as a lifestyle and a religion. That's a sideshow.
Which, by the way, I think they are valid. As a good Welsh boy, I love the Eisteddfod, I love the Druids in that sense. But but in this instance, as you say,
in terms of the argument about the Stonehenge tunnel, that and Stonehenge as a monument, that is a sideshow. I think the real issues are, first of all, in the broader sense, how English Heritage manages the monument and the National Trust, because the landscape is mostly National Trust. The monument itself is English Heritage, the charity that was floated off last year to look after what had been the government's portfolio of historic sites and monuments. And Stonehenge is their principal cash cow. If they can't make an economic success of Stonehenge and Overcast and one or two other places, then the financial model, which is admitted to be fairly tight, that English Heritage are working to, would be in serious trouble. So they have got to maximise their take. There's no, any which way you cut the figures, with the structure that they've been given, English Heritage have to make a financial success of that site.
Yes,
that's one issue.
Yeah,
and therefore the question is, how far are issues of access by the Druids and everybody else affected by the decisions that are made? Those economic decisions that are made about running the site as an economic entity, as a profit point, not to put it too bluntly. So that's the one issue. I think the second issue, again, is the road, the A303, the tunnel argument, and the broader World Heritage site of the Stonehenge landscape. We have what every time somebody puts a spade in the ground at Stonehenge or runs a magnetometer over it, makes a LiDAR run, we get new information about what is now probably one of the most intensively studied and rich prehistoric landscapes in Europe, certainly in Europe. And it's now clear from studies of people like the Amesbury remains like the Amesbury Archer and so on. It's been a European site again almost since it began. It was clearly of significant cultural importance, even back when it was created.
But this is true. This is absolutely true. But at the same time, work, for example, being done in the Orkneys at the moment is really revealing that place was even a magnitude more. I find it so interesting that again we always come back to Stonehenge.
Because at the moment Stonehenge is the World Heritage Site and is being overlooked by not just by the British government, by UNESCO, by the International Council on Monuments, and all those other stakeholders are playing into these arguments. And I think that if you wanted to reduce it to one line, and it's very easy for me sitting here as an observer and a commentator to come out with a glib line, and I'm not saying this for a moment to decry the very bright, very committed people who were involved in this process, but to reduce it to one line, it's taken, we now know, probably 10,000 years to create that landscape. And if we make the wrong decision about the tunnel, that landscape can be damaged irrevocably in 2 or 3 years.
Yes.
And that is a hell of a responsibility to take on. And I think it's beholden on all of us, whatever position you take, to ensure that whatever decision is made, and it might ultimately be that the best decision is actually to do nothing and leave things as they are, which is what's happened in the past.
Yeah, and funnily enough, actually, in that sense, it is very tempting to sort of try and solve the traffic problem now, but who knows what, I mean, with the inception of HS2 and other, say, for example, train and maybe even airport improvements in Britain, perhaps actually that road may end up not being the problem it is in the future. Who knows? And yeah, it's an interesting one. But I'm going to have to draw us to a close, I'm afraid. We've been yabbering on about this for quite a while.
Watch this space. Read the read and make submissions to the consultation. Take part, because as the old saying goes, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. So if it's no good regretting afterwards and you didn't take part.
Isn't that a song where they is it John T Mitchell put up a parking lot? Is it? Hopefully they don't put up a parking lot. Don't know what you've got till it's gone. Okay, right. So moving on. We're moving on. Stonehenge has been put away. We're putting it in the box. But obviously we're bound to return to Stonehenge at some point, aren't we?